A quick note before we begin. This story delves into themes of isolation, psychological suspense, and unsettling discoveries. Listener discretion is advised. Imagine, if you will, an entire town. Not a ghost town, not a forgotten settlement, but a town purpose-built brick by brick, with every intention of being completely, utterly annihilated. We're talking about the mid-20th century, the height of the Cold War, when the United States government, in its chilling pursuit of atomic power and understanding, constructed whole communities out of nothing. These weren't just empty shells. They were fully furnished, populated with department store mannequins dressed in the latest fashions, stocked with canned goods and newspapers, even filled with cars parked in driveways, all to simulate the everyday lives of ordinary American families. And then they detonated a nuclear bomb right on top of them. The sheer audacity of it, the cold, clinical precision of creating life just to watch it instantly unmake itself, is a concept that has haunted me for years. These were places designed to be erased, to become monuments to a terrifying new era. Most were reduced to dust, or scattered fragments barely recognizable as structures, but a very select few survived. Not intact, not pristine, but standing in a state of suspended animation, forever scarred, forever silent. It was one of these forgotten eerie places that drew Michael, Jessica, and David. They were a small, independent documentary crew, driven by a shared fascination with the hidden corners of American history, the stories etched into forgotten landscapes. Michael, the director, was a relentless researcher, fueled by coffee and an insatiable curiosity for the macabre beauty of decay. Jessica, their cinematographer, possessed an artist's eye, always seeking the perfect shot that captured both the tragedy and the strange resilience of time. And David, the sound engineer and drone operator, was their pragmatic anchor, a man who could fix anything and wasn't easily rattled. Their latest obsession was a place officially designated Site 7B, but colloquially known among urban explorers as Harmony Flats. Harmony Flats wasn't just a test site. It was an experimental suburban community. The government had gone to extraordinary lengths, building a mix of single-family homes, a small general store, a gas station, even a meticulously constructed schoolhouse. It was meant to simulate a typical American small town, down to the last picket fence. And it had been hit. Not directly, not with the full force that vaporized other sites, but with a significant blast wave and radiation fallout that had sealed its fate as an uninhabitable zone for decades. Now, after half a century, the authorities had downgraded its risk level, allowing restricted access to researchers and, if you knew the right channels and had the right permits, a small film crew. Their journey to Harmony Flats was a pilgrimage into desolation. Hours of driving through the stark, unforgiving landscape of the Nevada desert, the paved roads slowly giving way to cracked asphalt, then finally just a dirt track. The air was thick with a silence so profound it felt like a physical presence, pressing in on them. No birds sang, no insects buzzed. Just the whisper of the wind, carrying dust across a landscape that seemed to hold its breath. As they finally crested a low ridge, Harmony Flats unfolded before them. It wasn't the apocalyptic wasteland Michael had half expected. Instead, it was a tableau frozen in time, a diorama of a life that never truly lived. Houses stood, their paint peeling like sunburnt skin, windows shattered or opaque with dust. A rusted Ford pickup truck sat permanently parked outside a two-story colonial, its tires long deflated, its chrome dulled by the elements. The general store's sign, Miller's Mercantile, swung gently on a single hinge, a ghostly welcome. Unbelievable, Jessica breathed, her camera already up, panning slowly across the scene. It's like everyone just vanished. David, ever practical, checked his Geiger counter. Readings are stable, well within safe limits for short-term exposure. Still wouldn't want to live here, though. Michael, however, felt a different kind of chill. It wasn't the radiation that bothered him. It was the uncanny stillness, the perfect preservation of a moment that should have been obliterated. They spent the first few hours meticulously documenting the exterior, the skeletal remains of what was once a vibrant, if simulated, community. They filmed the schoolhouse, its tiny desks still arranged in neat rows, a chalkboard still bearing faded equations. They filmed the playground, a rusted swing set swaying eerily in the breeze, a lone teeter-totter pointing skyward like a forgotten monument. But it was when they entered the first house, a modest ranch-style home on Elm Street, that the true unsettling nature of Harmony Flats began to reveal itself. The front door, surprisingly, was ajar. creaking open with a sound that echoed unnaturally loud in the silence. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the scent of dust and decay, but beneath it, a faint, almost imperceptible smell of something else. Something synthetic like old plastic. Sunlight streamed through a broken window, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the stagnant air. The living room was exactly as it would have been staged. A floral couch, a coffee table with a stack of magazines from 1957, a television set with a curved screen. And then they saw it. Sitting upright on the couch, perfectly still and utterly out of place, was a mannequin. It wasn't a crude dummy. This was a sophisticated, lifelike figure, molded from fiberglass and plastic, with painted features and realistic hair. It was dressed in a faded but still discernible 1950s house dress, its hands resting in its lap, its head tilted slightly as if watching the long-dead television. Its eyes, painted a startlingly vivid blue, seemed to stare directly at them, unblinking, unseeing. "Whoa," David whispered, his usual calm momentarily broken. "Okay, that's unexpected." Jessica lowered her camera, a frown creasing her brow. "I thought they were all meant to be destroyed. Most of the reports say the mannequins were vaporized or blown to bits." Michael approached cautiously, his boots crunching softly on the debris-strewn floor. He circled the figure, a strange mix of morbid fascination and unease tightening in his chest. The mannequin was coated in a fine layer of dust, but otherwise perfectly intact. Not a crack, not a chip. It was as if it had been placed there yesterday, not 6 decades ago. "It's a test dummy, obviously," Michael said, trying to sound rational, even as his instincts screamed otherwise. "They used them to simulate human presence. This one must have been in a more protected part of the house, shielded from the blast." But the explanation felt hollow even to him. There was something about its posture, its serene, almost placid expression, that felt less like a scientific prop and more like a silent observer. They moved on, documenting the kitchen, the bedrooms. In the master bedroom, another mannequin lay on the bed, covered by a thin, tattered sheet, its head turned towards the door as if peacefully sleeping. In the child's room, a smaller mannequin, a little girl with painted pigtails, sat at a tiny wooden desk, a faded comic book open before it. It wasn't just a mannequin, it was mannequins. And they weren't scattered or broken. They were arranged. A knot of unease began to tighten in Michael's stomach. This wasn't just a preserved test site. It was a curated exhibition of the uncanny. Who had placed them like this? Was it the original government staging? Or had someone, in the decades since, ventured into Harmony Flats and meticulously reconstructed these eerie domestic scenes? "This is too perfect," Jessica murmured, her voice barely above a whisper, her camera now moving with a slower, more deliberate cadence. "Look at the details. The way the little girl's hands are posed, the tilt of the woman's head on the couch. This isn't just about blast effects." David, usually focused on his equipment, was now scanning the rooms with a new intensity. "There's no sign of forced entry, no recent tracks. If someone's been in here, they were incredibly careful." As they explored more houses, the pattern became undeniable. Every home they entered, even those showing more significant structural damage, contained at least one, often several, perfectly preserved mannequins. They were everywhere. A father figure standing by a dining table, a mother mannequin tending to a stove in a kitchen, a teenage boy lounging on a porch swing. And always, they were arranged in scenes of mundane, everyday life, frozen in a silent pantomime of domesticity. The initial scientific curiosity began to morph into something far more primal, a sense of profound disquiet. The silence of Harmony Flats, which had initially felt barren, now felt watchful. The empty houses weren't just empty, they were occupied by these silent, unmoving residents, their painted eyes following them from every window, every doorway. "This defies all the historical documentation," Michael stated, his voice tight. "The official report stated these mannequins were disposable. They were meant to be destroyed or at best heavily damaged. To find them like this in such specific posed scenarios, it just doesn't add up." The sun began to dip towards the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows that stretched the mannequins into grotesque caricatures. The friendly, painted smiles now seemed fixed, unsettling. The vacant stares felt heavy, accusatory. They had come to Harmony Flats seeking a forgotten piece of history, a relic of a terrifying past. What they had found instead was a riddle, a meticulously constructed puzzle populated by silent, plastic inhabitants. Who built this town, destroyed it, and then perhaps rebuilt its phantom population? And why? What secret was this ghost town and its unblinking residents desperately trying to keep? The real story of Harmony Flats, they realized with a growing sense of dread, was only just beginning. The real story of Harmony Flats, they realized with a growing sense of dread, was only just beginning. The sun beat down on the empty streets, but the warmth felt alien, a stark contrast to the chill that had settled deep in their bones. Michael, the lead researcher, ran a hand over his tired face, the dust of the forgotten town clinging to his skin like a second layer. Beside him, Jessica, their keen-eyed archivist and photographer, had already lowered her camera, her usual scientific detachment replaced by a wide-eyed apprehension. David, the team's geologist, always the most grounded, now just stared at the nearest mannequin, a bewildered frown etched onto his face. The easy answers, the dismissive theories, had evaporated like morning mist, leaving behind a profound and unsettling void. They couldn't leave. Not now. The initial mission to document the effects of time on a simulated atomic blast zone felt trivial, almost disrespectful. Harmony Flats wasn't just a historical curiosity. It was a riddle wrapped in stillness, a silent accusation. The mannequins were not merely props. They were witnesses, or perhaps something far more sinister. "We need more data," Michael said, his voice hushed, as if afraid to disturb the town's watchful silence. "We need to catalog every single one. Every detail. Every placement." Jessica nodded, her camera already returning to her eye. "I've been noticing patterns. They're not random. Not just for show. It's like someone arranged them to tell a story. A very specific, very unsettling story." David, still wrestling with the implications, finally spoke, his voice gravelly. "But why? And who? The official records state this place was sealed decades ago. No unauthorized access. Yet what we're seeing, it defies every logical explanation." They decided to extend their stay, pushing past the gnawing discomfort. Armed with their cameras, scanners, and a growing sense of foreboding, they began a methodical, painstaking survey of every building, every room, and every unblinking resident of Harmony Flats. The town, once a mere backdrop for a historical event, had transformed into a labyrinth of unanswered questions. Days blurred into a cycle of meticulous documentation and escalating unease. The silence of the town became less peaceful and more oppressive, a heavy blanket that muffled their own thoughts, amplifying every creak of decaying wood, every whisper of wind through broken panes. Jessica, with her photographer's eye, was the first to articulate the true peculiarity of the mannequins' arrangements. In the diner, a family of mannequins sat frozen mid-meal, but the mother's hand was extended, almost reaching for the child's face, a gesture of desperate comfort or perhaps a final futile warning. In the general store, a mannequin clerk stood behind the counter, but its gaze wasn't on the mannequin customer. It was fixed on the street outside, as if awaiting an arrival that never came. Each tableau, once appearing mundane, now seemed infused with a subtle, tragic narrative, a frozen moment of impending doom. Then Michael made a discovery in one of the suburban homes. In the master bedroom, a female mannequin lay posed on a bed, a magazine open on her chest. It was a typical scene designed to simulate normalcy, but as Michael leaned closer to adjust a scanner, he noticed something glinting on her left hand. It wasn't painted plastic. It was a thin, tarnished gold band, worn smooth in places, bearing the faint inscription of initials, M to RC, and a date, 1953. A real wedding ring, a genuine artifact from a real life, incongruously placed on a plastic hand in a ghost town. "This isn't a prop," Michael murmured, his voice barely audible. He carefully photographed the ring, his mind racing. This was someone real. Why would it be here? David, who had been examining the structural integrity of the house, chimed in. "And look at these stress fractures. They don't align with typical decay. It's almost like some of these structures were deliberately weakened, or even partially dismantled and then reassembled. There are anomalies everywhere if you look close enough. Things that don't fit the official timeline of abandonment and decay." The implications were chilling. If real personal items were being used, and if the town itself showed signs of deliberate, recent manipulation, then the story of Harmony Flats was far more complex than simple scientific observation. Someone had been here. Someone was here. Their search led them to the schoolhouse, a small single-room building on the edge of town. Inside, miniature desks and chairs were arranged neatly, and there, at one of the desks, sat a child-sized mannequin. It was different from the others they'd seen. Less pristine, its plastic skin scuffed, its painted eyes a little faded. It wasn't a generic prop, it felt more individual, as if it had been played with. Jessica knelt beside it, her camera clicking. "This one feels different," she whispered, her voice laced with an unfamiliar tremor. Almost sad. As she adjusted her lens, her fingers brushed against the mannequin's arm. Tucked beneath its rigid elbow, almost hidden by the sleeve of its faded dress, was a small crumpled piece of paper. Not a prop, not a document, but a child's drawing. Michael and David gathered around as Jessica carefully unfolded it. It was a crayon drawing rendered in crude, shaky strokes. The paper was clearly old, but the colors, dark blues, reds, and blacks, still held a disturbing vibrancy. It depicted stick figures, two smaller ones, presumably children, huddled together at the bottom of the page. Looming over them, dominating the entire upper half of the drawing, was a much larger, grotesque figure. It had no discernible features beyond two enormous, black, hollow eyes and outstretched, spindly limbs that seemed to reach for the smaller figures. It was a child's nightmarish rendition of a monster, or perhaps a memory. But what truly sent a jolt of icy fear through them was a single detail. In the bottom right corner, barely legible, written in a child's unsteady hand, were two words: "He watches." The air in the schoolhouse grew heavy, claustrophobic. The drawing wasn't from the 1950s. The paper, the crayon style, felt wrong for the era. It felt more recent. It felt like something a child trapped in this eerie place might have drawn. A child who had seen something truly terrifying. A shiver ran down Michael's spine, unrelated to the desert chill. They were no longer just documenting a ghost town. They were stumbling into an active mystery, a living secret that was still unfolding. The sense of being watched intensified, no longer a vague feeling, but a palpable presence. Every creak of the old wood, every gust of wind rattling a loose window pane, became a potential threat. They felt eyes on them, not just the painted, unblinking stares of the mannequins, but something else. Something unseen, lurking just beyond their peripheral vision. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, they decided to return to their makeshift camp outside the town's boundaries. The light was fading fast, and the thought of being caught in Harmony Flats after dark, with its silent residents and its new, disturbing secrets, was unbearable. They walked quickly, their footsteps crunching on the dusty road, the silence of the town pressing in on them. As they passed the general store again, the one with the clerk mannequin staring out at the street, Jessica paused. "Wait," she whispered, her voice tight with alarm. "Look." They all stopped, their eyes drawn to the store window. The mannequin clerk, which had been standing upright behind the counter, now seemed different. Its head was no longer facing the street. Instead, it was turned slightly, almost imperceptibly, directly towards them. And in its rigid plastic hand, which had been empty moments before, now rested a small tarnished silver locket. A locket that, in the fading light, seemed to glint with a faint metallic sheen, as if it had just been placed there. Michael felt a cold dread claw its way up his spine, a sensation far more potent than the desert chill. Jessica gasped, a small choked sound that echoed in the oppressive silence. They both stared, unblinking, at the mannequin's outstretched hand, at the tarnished silver locket now nestled in its rigid palm. It hadn't been there. Michael would stake his life on it. His mind, usually a fortress of logic and scientific reasoning, was reeling. "No," he whispered, the word barely audible. That's not possible." Jessica took a shaky step back, her eyes wide with a terror that mirrored his own. "It moved, Michael. It moved. And now that." Her voice was a fragile thread, threatening to snap. He wanted to rationalize it, to find some trick of the light, some clever prank. But the town had been utterly deserted for decades. There were no other footprints in the dust near the porch, no sign of recent human activity beyond their own. The locket itself looked ancient, dull with years of neglect, yet somehow undeniably newly placed. "Stay here," Michael muttered, though he knew it was a foolish command. Jessica was practically frozen in place. He took a hesitant step forward, his gaze fixed on the mannequin. Its painted eyes, unblinking and vacant, seemed to follow him. The slight tilt of its head, the way its arm was angled, felt deliberate, almost invitational. He reached out, his fingers trembling, hovering inches from the locket. It was cool to the touch, heavy. He snatched it quickly, as if afraid the mannequin would retract its hand. The plastic fingers remained stiff, unyielding. "What is it?" Jessica whispered, finally moving to his side, her shoulder brushing against his. Michael examined the locket. It was intricately carved, with a faded floral pattern on its surface, but years of exposure had dulled its former luster. A tiny clasp held it shut. He tried to pry it open with his thumbnail, but it was stubborn. "Here," Jessica said, her voice a little steadier now, curiosity beginning to override her fear. "Let me try." She took it from him, her smaller fingers more nimble. With a soft click, the locket sprang open. Inside, nestled in the faded velvet lining, was a tiny sepia-toned photograph. It was of a young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, her hair styled in soft waves typical of the 1950s. She had striking, intelligent eyes and a faint, enigmatic smile. Despite the photograph's age and the locket's tarnished state, her beauty was undeniable, a ghostly echo from another time. Michael felt a strange pang. She looked so alive, so real, unlike the plastic shell that had just presented her image to them. Beneath the photograph, etched into the silver, were two faint initials, M. And below that, almost imperceptibly small, a single word, "Forgotten." "I'm forgotten," Jessica read aloud, her voice hushed. "Who is she? Why would the mannequin have this?" The questions hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. Michael looked back at the mannequin. It stood there, motionless once more, but now in his mind it held a new significance. It wasn't just a prop. It was a messenger. "This changes everything," Michael said, his mind racing. "This isn't just some abandoned town with lingering radiation. This is something else. This locket, this woman, it's a clue." "A clue to what?" Jessica asked, her gaze fixed on the photo of Evelyn. "A forgotten person? A forgotten story." "Exactly," Michael affirmed. "And if the mannequin gave it to us, then it wants us to find out." He looked around the dusty, silent living room. "We need to search this house. This woman, she must have lived here, or had some connection to this place." The initial terror had receded, replaced by a surge of adrenaline-fueled determination. The mystery, once abstract and unsettling, had become personal. They now held a tangible piece of a puzzle, a link to a human life intertwined with this desolate place. They began to search the small, single-story house methodically. Dust motes danced in the fading light filtering through the grimy windows. Each creak of the floorboards, each whisper of the wind outside, seemed amplified, taking on a new ominous quality. They moved from the living room to a small kitchen, its appliances rusted hulks, its cabinets empty. Then down a short hallway they found two bedrooms. The first bedroom was barren, stripped of everything but a thin layer of dust. But the second, though equally neglected, held a faint trace of a life once lived. In one corner, beneath a grimy window, stood a small wooden vanity dresser, its mirror long since shattered, leaving only jagged shards of glass in the frame. "Look," Jessica whispered, pointing. Maybe something here." Michael knelt, carefully pulling open the top drawer. It groaned on rusted runners, exhaling a puff of stale, musty air. Inside, beneath a crumpled, faded lace doily, lay a small leather-bound journal. It looked surprisingly well-preserved, its cover embossed with a delicate, almost invisible pattern. He picked it up, feeling the surprising weight of it in his hand. "This has to be it." They carried the journal back to the living room, placing it on the floor near the mannequin, as if in silent acknowledgement of its role. The last rays of sunlight were painting the room in long, distorted shadows, making the mannequin appear even more imposing. Michael sat down, cross-legged, and carefully opened the journal. The first few pages were filled with elegant, looping script, slightly faded but still legible. August 12th, 195X. The heat here in Prosperity Peak is something else. But the air is so clear, and the stars at night breathtaking. Daddy says the new assignment is temporary just until the tests are complete, but I have a good feeling about this place. It's small, yes, but everyone is so friendly. And the general store has the most beautiful ribbons. I picked out a lovely cerulean blue for my new dress. Michael looked up at Jessica. Prosperity Peak. That must be the original name of this town. Jessica nodded, her eyes fixed on the journal. "Keep reading," he continued, the words transporting them back in time, to a vibrant, living community before the desolation. Evelyn Maeve, he presumed, judging by the initials in the locket, was a young woman full of life and optimism. She wrote about her daily routines, the small joys, the friendships she was forming. She mentioned the preparations for the tests with a mix of awe and a touch of apprehension, but mostly she seemed excited by the novelty of it all. September 5th, 195X. The buzz about the upcoming Operation Sunspot is growing. They've started bringing in these figures for the houses, they say, to simulate a normal town. Mannequins. They're rather eerie, aren't they? Especially the ones they've put in the general store window. One of them, a woman in a floral apron, seems to have such a peculiar tilt to her head. Sometimes when I walk by, I feel as though her eyes follow me. Silly, I know. Just plastic and paint. Michael paused, a shiver running down his spine. He looked at the mannequin on the porch, now almost swallowed by the deepening twilight. The woman in the floral apron. It had to be this mannequin. She noticed it too, Jessica murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. The way it looked at her. He turned another page. The tone of the entries began to shift, subtly at first, then more pronounced. The excitement faded, replaced by a growing sense of unease. October 1st, 195X. They're starting to evacuate families. Just the non-essential personnel, they say, for their safety, but the town feels emptier, quieter. Mrs. Henderson left today with her children. I waved goodbye, but she didn't look back. She just hurried them into the bus. Daddy says it's all part of the plan, but I don't like it. The mannequins are still here, though. More of them, it seems. Sometimes I swear I can hear things when I'm alone in the house. Just the wind, Daddy assures me. But the wind here doesn't whisper names. Michael's heart began to pound harder. Names? What names? October 15th, 195X. Almost everyone is gone now. It's just Daddy and me and a few of the other scientists and their families. They say we'll be leaving soon too. But I'm worried about Daddy. He's been so distant, so focused on his work. He barely eats. And the noises, they're louder now. Not just whispers. Sometimes it sounds like something is moving in the other rooms. I try to tell myself it's my imagination, but the mannequins, they watch. Especially her. The one in the general store. I feel her presence even when I'm not looking. It's not silly anymore, Michael. It's real. She knows. The journal slipped slightly in Michael's trembling hands. He had to remind himself to breathe. She knows. Evelyn, writing in her journal, had used his name. No, that couldn't be right. It was just a coincidence. A common name. He flipped to the next page, his eyes scanning for more. The handwriting had become more erratic, the lines uneven, as if written in haste or distress. October 20th, 195X. Daddy says we're leaving tomorrow. Finally. I've packed my trunk, but something feels wrong. I can't explain it. A sense of foreboding. The silence here is deafening, yet full of unseen things. The mannequin, she's been moved. She's on our porch now, just staring at the door. I tried to tell Daddy, but he just patted my hand and said I was overtired. He doesn't see it. He doesn't feel it. She wants something. She waits. Michael looked up, his gaze snapping to the porch. The mannequin. Their mannequin. It had been on the porch. October 21st, 195X. They left. All of them. Daddy, he said he'd be right back. Just needed to check one last thing at the lab. He promised. But the bus left. I saw it. Called out. They didn't hear me. Or they didn't care. I'm alone. The town is empty. Except for her. She's still on the porch. And now she's inside. In the living room. She's closer. I can hear her. A faint plastic creaking sound. She's not just plastic. She's something else. She won't let me leave. She wants me to stay. She needs me to tell her story. The story of the forgotten. I tried to run, but the doors, they're locked. All of them. And she's standing by the window now, watching me. I don't understand. Why? Why me? I just wanted to leave. I want to go home. She's looking at my locket. She wants it. She wants it for when you come. For when you find me. Remember. Please. Remember Evelyn Maeve. The forgotten. The entry ended abruptly. the last word trailing off into a frantic, illegible scribble. Michael stared at the page, then at the locket in his hand, then at the mannequin on the porch. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. Evelyn Maeve had been left behind. She hadn't evacuated. She had been trapped here. And the mannequin, it hadn't just been on the porch. It had moved inside just as she described. It had been waiting. And now, it had given them Evelyn's locket. The air in the room grew heavy, thick with unseen presences. A cold draft snaked around their ankles, though the windows were closed. The silence outside seemed to press in on them, no longer just quiet but expectant. Then from somewhere deep within the house, a faint rhythmic creak began. It sounded like something heavy, something stiff, slowly, deliberately moving across the floor. Not the wind, not the house settling. It was coming from the hallway just beyond the living room, and it was getting closer. The creaking was no longer just a sound, it was a presence. Each deliberate creak vibrated through the floorboards, through the very air, and straight into David's bones. He was paralyzed, a statue of pure, unadulterated terror. His breath hitched in his throat, a ragged, silent gasp. The air in the room, already heavy with dust and the scent of decay, suddenly felt impossibly thick, suffocating. He squeezed his eyes shut for a split second, desperately wishing this was a nightmare, a cruel trick of his overactive imagination fueled by the isolation and the eerie history of Frenchman's Flat. But when he opened them again, the darkness was still there, the silence punctuated only by the relentless approach of something. His mind, usually so sharp and analytical, spun wildly, grasping at any rational explanation. When? No, the house had been eerily still. An animal? No animal made that kind of rhythmic, heavy sound. It was mechanical, deliberate, unnatural. It was the sound of something large, something stiff, being dragged or awkwardly propelled. The image of the mannequin, its vacant stare, its stiff limbs, flashed through his mind, chilling him to the core. But that was impossible. Mannequins don't move. They don't. The creaking stopped. The sudden cessation was almost worse than the sound itself. It left a void, an echoing silence that screamed louder than any noise. David's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the stillness. He strained his ears, every fiber of his being focused on the black rectangle of the hallway entrance. Was it waiting? Was it watching? He dared not breathe, dared not even twitch a muscle. Then a new sound. A soft, almost imperceptible thump, like something falling gently or being set down, followed by a faint, rustling whisper, like old fabric shifting. David's eyes darted, trying to pierce the gloom. He saw nothing, only deeper shadows. He felt a cold dread seep into his stomach, spreading outwards. It wasn't just the mannequin anymore. It was the implication. Someone or something had moved it. Or it was moving. He had to know. He couldn't just sit there, a helpless victim to his own fear. Adrenaline, sharp and potent, finally cut through his paralysis. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, he reached for the small, heavy flashlight he'd left on the side table. His fingers brushed against the cool metal, a small comfort in the overwhelming terror. He gripped it tight, his thumb hovering over the switch. 1 breath. 2. 3. He flicked it on. The beam, a stark white spear, cut through the oppressive darkness, illuminating the dusty living room in harsh relief. He swept it around the room, confirming he was still alone, his gaze lingering on the empty armchair, the overturned book. Then, with a surge of courage born of desperation, he aimed it at the hallway. The beam sliced through the darkness, revealing nothing. The hallway was empty. The floorboards, ancient and scarred, stretched out into the deeper blackness of the house. No mannequin. No signs of struggle. No footprints in the dust. Just the oppressive silence, now broken only by the frantic pounding of his own heart. David let out a shaky breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He felt a wave of dizzying relief, quickly followed by a cold, sickening doubt. Had he imagined it? Had the isolation and the sheer creepiness of the town finally gotten to him? He was exhausted, his nerves frayed. It was plausible. He wanted it to be plausible. But then, his gaze drifted to the far end of the hallway, where a closed door stood. The door to the master bedroom. And leaning against the doorframe, half obscured by the shadows that still clung stubbornly to the corners, was a figure. It was the mannequin. It stood perfectly still, its blank, painted eyes staring directly down the hallway, as if watching him. But it wasn't just standing. It was different. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, slightly askew, as if its neck had been twisted. And its right arm, which David distinctly remembered seeing fixed rigidly at its side, was now slightly bent at the elbow, its stiff fingers pointing towards the bedroom door it leaned against. A fresh wave of terror, colder and more potent than before, washed over David. He hadn't imagined it. It had moved. Or more accurately, it had been moved. But not by him. Not by the wind. And who or what could move such a heavy, rigid object so silently, so deliberately, and then disappear without a trace? His mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. A prank? But he was miles from anywhere, in a ghost town. No one knew he was here. A squatter? Unlikely in such a remote, desolate place. And the way it was positioned, it felt purposeful. A message. A warning. The mannequin's pointing arm was a silent command. An invitation to the unknown depths of the house. David felt a primal instinct screaming at him to run, to get out, to drive away from this cursed place and never look back. But a strange, morbid curiosity, a professional need to understand, held him captive. He was a researcher after all. He came here for answers. And now it seemed the answers were beginning to reveal themselves, whether he wanted them or not. He took a tentative step forward, the flashlight beam unwavering. The dust motes danced in the light, the only movement in the otherwise frozen scene. Each step was a battle against his own overwhelming fear. The floorboards groaned softly under his weight, a sound that seemed deafening in the profound silence. He reached the mannequin, standing a few feet away from it. Up close, the details were even more unsettling. The painted smile seemed wider, more sinister. The vacant eyes seemed to hold a flicker of something, a reflection of the flashlight beam that made them appear alive, watching. He noticed a faint, almost imperceptible scratch mark on its plastic face, just below the left eye like a fresh wound. And then he saw it. Clutched loosely in the mannequin's pointing hand, almost hidden by its stiff fingers, was an object. It was small, dark, and irregular in shape. David's heart gave another lurch. He reached out, his hand trembling, and carefully pried the object from the mannequin's grip. It was a piece of scorched, brittle fabric. Old, faded denim, but clearly identifiable. And stitched onto it, though barely legible due to the burn marks, were two letters: JR. David stared at the fabric, his mind reeling. JR? He'd read countless reports, articles, and declassified documents about Frenchman's Flat. There were lists of personnel, military observers, scientists, even the names of the families who had lived in the test houses for a short period before the detonations. No JR had ever been mentioned in connection with these specific houses, especially not in a way that would leave a piece of clothing here. He remembered a detail from his research, a passing mention in an obscure historical society archive. Some of the mannequins used in the tests were dressed in actual clothing donated by local residents or sourced from military surplus. But this felt different. This felt personal. He looked back at the mannequin. Its face, its pose, the way it held the fabric. It felt like a silent accusation. Or a plea. He felt a sudden, inexplicable chill that had nothing to do with the desert night. This wasn't just a prop in a forgotten town. It was a witness. He turned his flashlight beam to the bedroom door the mannequin was pointing at. It was slightly ajar, a sliver of deeper darkness visible within. He hesitated, his rational mind screaming at him to turn back, to ignore the silent summons. But the historian in him, the relentless seeker of truth, compelled him forward. He had to see what was inside. He had to understand. With another deep, unsteady breath, David pushed the door open. The room was a mirror image of the living room. Dusty, stripped bare, a skeleton of domesticity. The window, though boarded up, allowed a faint, ghostly moonlight to filter through the cracks, casting long, distorted shadows that danced with his flashlight beam. An old, rusted bed frame stood in the center, its springs exposed like ribs. A broken dresser lay on its side against one wall. But it was the far corner of the room that caught David's eye, and made his blood run cold. There, tucked away, almost hidden by the collapsed remains of a wardrobe, was another mannequin. This one was different. It wasn't the pristine, featureless type he'd seen in the living room. This mannequin was old, its plastic skin discolored and cracked, its wig askew. It was dressed in what looked like faded, childlike clothing, A small tattered dress and tiny scuffed shoes. It was a child mannequin. And it was sitting. Not standing, not leaning, but sitting upright, its back against the wall, its knees drawn up, its head bowed. As if in mourning. Or in fear. David felt a profound sense of unease settle over him. Why had this one been hidden? And why was it posed like this? He slowly approached, his flashlight beam fixed on the small figure. He noticed something else then, something that made his stomach clench. Around the child mannequin's neck, tied with a thin, brittle string, was a small tarnished metal locket. He knelt down, his fingers trembling as he reached for it. The locket was cold to the touch. He carefully unlatched it, his heart pounding in anticipation. Inside, nestled behind faded, scratched plastic, were two tiny, almost indistinguishable photographs. One was of a woman, her face blurry with age and damage, but with kind eyes. The other was of a smiling young girl, no older than 7 or 8, her hair in braids, a wide, joyful grin on her face. And beneath the girl's photograph, etched into the metal, were the initials, J.R. The piece of scorched denim with J.R. clutched in the other mannequin's hand, the child mannequin hidden away, its locket containing a photograph of a young girl with the same initials. It clicked into place with a horrifying certainty. This wasn't just a random prop. This was personal. This was a story. A tragic one, perhaps, left behind in the ruins of this desolate town. David stood up slowly, feeling a new kind of dread. The mannequins weren't just objects of the past. They were messengers. And they were trying to tell him something. But who was JR? And why was her story being revealed to him now? The implications were far more sinister than a simple haunting. It felt like a carefully orchestrated revelation, a desperate plea from the past, echoing through the empty rooms of Frenchman's flat. He looked from the child mannequin to the locket in his hand, then back towards the hallway where the other mannequin stood. The silence of the house pressed in, no longer just empty, but heavy with unspoken secrets. The air seemed to hum with a residual energy, a lingering presence that defied explanation. He had come seeking answers about the atomic tests, about human resilience in the face of destruction. Instead, he was finding traces of a human tragedy, brought to life by inanimate figures in the most unsettling way imaginable. And he knew with a chilling certainty that this was only the beginning. The mannequins had just started their story. Michael stood there, the dust motes dancing in the slivers of sunlight piercing the broken windows, a silent testament to the passage of decades. The chill he felt wasn't from the desert air. It was from the profound realization that he wasn't just observing an abandoned town, he was witnessing a meticulously staged narrative. Each stiff limb, each painted gaze was a word in a silent language, weaving a tale more disturbing than any horror film. He pulled out his phone, the signal non-existent, but the camera still worked. He needed to document this every chilling detail. He took several photos of the family scene, zooming in on the dog, the child's toy, the mother's perpetually startled expression. The sheer effort involved in arranging these figures, in creating this tableau of domesticity on the brink of disaster, was staggering. Who would do this? And why? This wasn't the work of military scientists placing dummies for blast effects. This was art, macabre and unsettling, designed to evoke a specific, terrible emotion. Driven by a morbid curiosity that warred with his growing unease, Michael decided he had to explore further. If there was one scene, there had to be more. He walked out of the house, the crunch of broken glass under his boots echoing in the oppressive silence. The sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the desolate landscape in hues of orange and purple. He had to work quickly before darkness descended, bringing with it not just the challenge of visibility, but the amplified terror of the unknown. He moved methodically, checking each building along the main street. The first few were empty, just shells of former lives, stripped bare by time and neglect. A general store, its shelves long cleared of goods, stood with its door ajar, groaning faintly in the wind. Inside, dust lay thick on the counter, and a single rusted cash register sat like a forgotten relic. No mannequins here, just the ghosts of commerce. Next was a small, clapboard church, its steeple leaning precariously. Michael pushed open the heavy wooden doors, revealing a single aisle leading to a raised altar. Pews, covered in a thick layer of grime, stretched out on either side. And there, in the very first pew, sat another mannequin. This one was different. It was a male figure, dressed in what looked like a faded, ill-fitting suit. His head was bowed, as if in prayer or deep contemplation. His hands, crudely molded, were clasped together on his lap. But it was his face that truly unnerved Michael. Unlike the startled family, this mannequin had a serene, almost peaceful expression, a faint, painted smile on his lips. It was profoundly out of place in a town designed for destruction, spoke of acceptance or perhaps resignation. Michael felt a prickle on the back of his neck. This wasn't just a collection of discarded dummies. This was a story with characters, emotions, and a narrative thread. He circled the figure, his camera clicking softly. He noticed a small object clutched loosely in the mannequin's clasped hands, a tarnished silver locket. Carefully, Michael pried it open. Inside, nestled behind faded plastic, were two tiny, almost indistinguishable photographs. One appeared to be of a young woman, the other of a small child too blurry to tell if it was a boy or girl. The same child from the house? The same woman? He couldn't be sure, but the implication was chilling. This mannequin, this man was connected. He gently closed the locket and placed it back in the mannequin's hands. The stillness of the church was suddenly suffocating. He felt an urge to leave, to put distance between himself and these silent witnesses, but the story had him in its grip. He had to know more. He felt a strange obligation, as if these plastic figures were begging him to understand their silence, to give voice to their tragedy. He continued his exploration, moving with a newfound urgency. The sun dipped lower, casting long, distorted shadows that danced like phantoms in his peripheral vision. Every creak of wood, every whisper of wind made him jump. He checked a small diner, a gas station, a barbershop, all empty, devoid of any staged figures. The silence pressed in, broken only by his own ragged breath. Then he saw it. A building larger than the others, set slightly apart, with a sign that had long since rusted away, but whose shape suggested a schoolhouse. A single broken swing set stood forlornly in the dusty yard, its chain swaying almost imperceptibly. Michael's heart hammered against his ribs. He pushed open the heavy wooden door, which groaned like a dying animal. The air inside was heavy, thick with the smell of decay and ancient chalk dust. This wasn't a classroom. It was a large hall, perhaps an assembly room or a gymnasium, and it was filled. Dozens of mannequins stood and sat, arranged in a chaotic yet deliberate manner. They weren't in neat rows. They were clustered, some facing the door, others huddled together, some with arms outstretched, others seemingly collapsed. Most were children, smaller figures mixed with a few adult mannequins. Their faces, uniformly blank and expressionless, somehow conveyed a profound sense of terror. They were frozen in various stages of panic, of flight, of despair. A chill, colder than any desert night, coursed through Michael. This wasn't just a scene. It was a snapshot of a moment of pure, unadulterated pandemonium. It was a crowd, caught in the throes of an unseen catastrophe. He walked slowly amongst them, his footsteps echoing unnaturally loud. He noticed details that made his stomach clench. A child mannequin on the floor, its head turned away from a nearby adult figure, as if trying to hide. Another standing rigid, its painted eyes fixed on the ceiling. A cluster of 3 child mannequins, arms linked, facing outward as if bracing for an impact. This was no test setup. This was a recreation of a human tragedy, rendered in plastic and paint. The official story of these towns being uninhabited test sites, populated only by military-grade dummies, felt like a cruel, elaborate lie. These were not just generic figures. The variations in their clothing, the subtle differences in their molds, suggested a painstaking effort to create individual representations. He stopped before an adult mannequin, a woman, standing near what looked like a makeshift podium at the front of the hall. Her head was thrown back, her mouth agape in a silent scream. Her right arm was raised, pointing towards the back of the room, towards the main entrance. And in her left hand, clutched tightly against her chest, was a small leather-bound book. Michael's hands trembled as he reached for it. It felt old, brittle. He carefully opened it. It was a journal. The pages were yellowed, the ink faded, but the handwriting was clear, if a little spidery. He could make out the date on the first visible page. October 23, 1952. His blood ran cold. The first atomic test in this series, Operation Ivy, had occurred on November 1, 1952. He began to read the entry, his voice a hoarse whisper in the cavernous, silent hall. October 23, 1952. The tremors are getting worse. Not just the ground, but the air itself feels wrong. We were told this town was safe, a model community for a new future. A government project, they said, for families of those working on classified research. We were promised protection, isolation from the outside world for the sake of national security. But the whispers have started. Whispers of a different kind of project. Of experiments. Of being too close to something unspeakable. David keeps telling me it's just the desert settling, the wind playing tricks. But I saw Mrs. Peterson crying today, clutching her prayer book. And little Emily, she won't stop drawing pictures of strange, glowing clouds. Michael's eyes darted around the room, from the journal to the terrified mannequins. Emily, Mrs. Peterson, David, these were names. Real names. This wasn't a test site. This was a community that had been living here, unknowingly, on the precipice of an atomic apocalypse. And someone, for reasons Michael couldn't yet fathom, had decided to tell their story, not with words, but with these chilling silent witnesses. He flipped another page, his heart pounding. The next entry was dated October 29, 1952. October 29, 1952. Oh God, it's not tremors. It's not the wind. They came today. Men in uniform. They said it was time for evacuation immediate. But their eyes told a different story. They were afraid. They told us to gather in the assembly hall, that buses were coming. But the buses never arrived. Instead, we heard a distant rumbling, a sound that shook the very foundations of the earth. Panic erupted. Children screaming. David was trying to calm everyone, but I saw it in his eyes too. Fear. Pure, unadulterated fear. The air grew heavy, thick with an acrid smell. And then a light so brilliant, so blinding. It felt like the sun had fallen from the sky and exploded in our faces. We were told we were safe. We were told we were protected. It was all a lie. I can feel it now, the heat, the pressure. We're trapped. They lied to us. They left us here. And the light, it's getting closer. I can hear the screams. The children, my Emily. The entry ended abruptly, the last word scrawled frantically, trailing off into an illegible smear of ink. Michael stared at the page, his mind reeling. This wasn't fiction. This was a first-hand account of a horrifying betrayal. This town, this model community, had been sacrificed. The people, these families, had been left here deliberately to witness and endure the atomic blast, perhaps as some twisted experiment. He looked up from the journal, his gaze sweeping across the silent, petrified figures in the hall. They weren't just mannequins. They were the echoes of real people, trapped in their final moments of terror. And the person who had staged this, who had arranged these figures, who had left this journal, wanted the world to know. The truth, buried for decades, was screaming from these silent witnesses. But then, out of the corner of his eye, he caught a flicker of movement. A shadow, not his own, detached itself from the far wall, near the main entrance. It was too quick to be a trick of the light, too deliberate to be a figment of his overactive imagination. He froze, his breath caught in his throat. He wasn't alone. Someone else was here. And they had been watching him. David's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs, a drumbeat of pure adrenaline echoing in the profound silence of the deserted town. He hadn't imagined it. The movement was too fluid, too deliberate. A shadow, a human-like form, had been there watching him, then vanished as quickly as it appeared. The air, already thick with dust and the scent of decay, now felt charged with an unseen presence, a malevolent awareness. He stood perfectly still, straining his ears, trying to pierce the oppressive quiet. Did he hear a faint scuff of a shoe on gravel? A rustle of fabric? Nothing. Only the erratic thumping of his own pulse and the distant, almost imperceptible whisper of the wind through the skeletal trees at the town's edge. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to flee this cursed place and never look back. But a stubborn, terrifying curiosity, mixed with a growing sense of vulnerability, rooted him to the spot. He had to know. He had to understand who or what was sharing this desolate stage with him. Cautiously, David took a step, then another, moving towards the main entrance where he'd seen the fleeting glimpse. His flashlight beam cut through the encroaching gloom, dancing over cracked pavement and the faded outlines of what were once bustling storefronts. He swept the beam methodically, searching every nook, every alcove, every shadowed doorway. There was nothing. No footprints in the dust, no displaced debris. No telltale sign that anyone had been there just moments ago. It was as if the figure had simply dissolved into the irradiated air. A shiver, colder than the desert night, traced its way down his spine. Was it a trick of his mind? Had the isolation, the unnerving mannequins, and the sheer strangeness of the situation finally started to break his composure? He shook his head, dismissing the thought. His mind was sharp, his senses on high alert. He had seen something. Someone. The realization brought with it a fresh wave of dread. This wasn't just about strange radio signals or unsettling effigies anymore. This was about a direct personal threat. Someone was here in this abandoned town, and they were aware of his presence. Were they the ones behind the mannequin placements? Were they monitoring the strange broadcasts? Or were they just another lost soul, trapped in this bizarre, forgotten place? He gripped his flashlight tighter, its cold metal a small comfort in his trembling hand. He couldn't stay out in the open. The main street, once a path of discovery, now felt like an exposed stage. He needed cover, a vantage point, or at the very least, a place where he could control the points of entry. His gaze fell upon the old schoolhouse, its broken windows like vacant eyes staring out into the twilight. It was a larger building, more substantial than the small homes, and offered more potential hiding spots, and perhaps more clues. Moving with a newfound urgency, David hugged the shadowed sides of buildings, his senses hyper-aware of every creak and groan the wind produced. The schoolhouse stood at the far end of what must have been the residential district, a two-story structure with a small bell tower that had long since lost its bell. He pushed open the heavy, splintered wooden door, which groaned in protest, sending a cascade of dust motes dancing in his flashlight beam. The interior was even darker than the street, a cavernous space filled with the lingering scent of old chalk, decaying paper, and something else, something metallic, almost like old blood. He stepped inside, his boots echoing loudly on the warped wooden floorboards. The main hall stretched before him, lined with empty lockers, their doors hanging ajar like gaping mouths. To his left, a classroom door swung slowly on a single hinge, revealing a tableau that made his blood run cold. Inside, arranged in neat rows of decaying desks, sat not children but mannequins. Dozens of them. They were smaller than the adults he'd seen, clearly meant to represent children, though their features were just as blank, just as unsettling. Some wore tattered school uniforms, others simple dresses or overalls. One, positioned at the teacher's desk, held a piece of chalk in its stiff hand, pointing at a faded blackboard covered in illegible equations and what looked like crude diagrams of atomic structures. But it wasn't just the sheer number of them, or their disturbing arrangement, that chilled him. It was the details. On one child mannequin's desk, a small faded photograph lay face down. David approached cautiously, his beam illuminating the dust-covered image. He picked it up, his thumb brushing away the grime. It was a black and white photo, clearly very old, depicting a smiling family. A mother, a father, and two young children. Their faces were innocent, full of hope, utterly oblivious to the grim fate that would eventually befall their town. He flipped it back over, placing it carefully on the desk. Then he noticed something else. On the blackboard, amidst the scientific scrawlings, was a single stark word, written in fresh chalk, overlaid on the older faded text. Observe. The hairs on the back of his neck prickled. This wasn't old. The chalk dust was still fine, not settled into the grooves of the board. Whoever had been watching him, whoever had been in the town, had been here. And they had left him a message. David's breath hitched. Was this a warning? A challenge? Or a clue? The word observe resonated with the eerie feeling he'd been having since he first arrived. The sense of being watched, of being part of some twisted experiment. He began to move through the classroom, his flashlight beam sweeping across the silent, unblinking faces of the mannequin children. Each one seemed to hold a secret, a silent accusation. He checked under desks, inside the lockers, behind the teacher's podium. Nothing else. Just the unsettling silence and the weight of the message on the blackboard. He moved into the next classroom and then the next. Each one was a variation on the same theme. Mannequins as students, mannequins as teachers. In one room, a single mannequin lay slumped in the corner, its head twisted at an unnatural angle, an arm detached and lying beside it. It looked less like a prop and more like a victim. David felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. As he reached the last classroom on the ground floor, he noticed something different. The door was slightly ajar, and a faint, Almost imperceptible hum seemed to emanate from within. He pushed the door open slowly, revealing a room that was starkly different from the others. This wasn't a classroom. It was smaller, more like an office or a storage room. In the center, on a rickety table, sat a collection of electronic equipment that looked strangely out of place. Old, bulky radio receivers, wires snaking across the table, connected to a series of blinking lights and dials. And beside it, a stack of blank cassette tapes. His heart pounded. This was it. This had to be the source of the radio signals, or at least a part of the puzzle. He approached the table, his eyes scanning the archaic technology. One of the receivers was powered on, its small green light glowing faintly, emitting the low, steady hum he'd heard. He leaned in, listening intently. A faint, almost inaudible static filled the air, occasionally punctuated by a barely discernible crackle. He reached out, his fingers hovering over the dials. Should he touch it? Should he try to tune it? The word observe flashed in his mind. Was he meant to simply observe this too? Then he saw it. Tucked beneath one of the receivers, half hidden by a tangle of wires, was a small leather-bound journal. It looked old, worn, its pages yellowed with age. He carefully pulled it out. The cover was blank, but as he opened it, he saw neat, handwritten entries, dated meticulously, spanning several decades. The handwriting was precise, almost scientific. The first entry he saw read, October 26, 1957. Phase 1. Installation complete. The subjects are in place. The environment is stable. Initial observations confirm expected psychological degradation in isolated conditions. David's blood ran cold. Subjects. Psychological degradation. He flipped through the pages frantically, his eyes darting across the cryptic entries. Phrases like stimulus response, control group, environmental stressors, and behavioral anomalies leaped out at him. This wasn't just a ghost town. It was an experiment. A horrifying long-term study conducted on whom? The mannequins? Or was it something far more sinister, something that involved the people who once lived here? He continued to read, his heart sinking with each new revelation. The broadcasts are having the desired effect. The illusion of communication, the distorted messages, are creating a potent sense of unease and paranoia. Excellent. The radio signals. They were intentional, designed to cause paranoia. And the observer, the presence he'd felt, the message on the blackboard, it was all part of it. He wasn't just an intruder. He was now a part of their twisted experiment. He looked around the small, cluttered room, his gaze settling on a single full-sized mannequin propped against the far wall. It was different from the others. Its face, though still blank, seemed to possess a subtle, almost imperceptible smirk, and around its neck, hanging from a thin chain, was a small tarnished silver locket. Gripping the journal, David moved towards the mannequin, a chilling realization dawning on him. The person who had been watching him, the one who left the message, they weren't just an observer. They were an active participant. And this mannequin, with its knowing smirk in the locket, felt like a deliberate, personal taunt. He reached out, his fingers brushing the cold metal of the locket, a sense of profound dread washing over him. He was no longer just exploring a mystery. He was trapped inside one. And the experiment, whatever it was, had just begun. He was no longer just exploring a mystery. He was trapped inside one. And the experiment, whatever it was, had just begun. Michael's fingers clamped around the locket, the cold metal a stark contrast to the sudden clammy sweat on his palm. Eleanor May. His grandmother. The same initials M, engraved in elegant script, identical to the one she always wore, tucked beneath her blouse. And the date? 1957. A year she rarely spoke of, a period in her life she kept guarded behind a veil of polite, almost wistful silence. His mind reeled, trying to connect the dots, but they formed no coherent picture, only a swirling vortex of impossible questions. Why was his grandmother's locket here, in a forgotten bunker beneath a fake 1950s house, in a desolate atomic test town? Why was he specifically welcomed? A cold dread, far deeper than any he'd felt before, settled in his stomach. This wasn't some random historical anomaly. This was personal, intensely, terrifyingly personal. He instinctively reached for his satellite phone, fumbling for it in his pocket, his heart hammering against his ribs. He needed to call for help, to to tell anyone what he'd found. But the screen remained stubbornly blank, no signal bars appearing. He tried again, moving around the small control room, holding it aloft, desperate. Nothing. Dead. The silence of the bunker pressed in on him, amplifying the frantic beat of his own pulse. Panic began to set in, a cold, sharp claw gripping his throat. He spun, looking at the heavy steel door that led back to the main living area of the bunker. He yanked at the handle, pushing, pulling, desperate to get out, to find a way back to the surface. It was sealed, bolted from the outside or perhaps from within by some unseen force. He was trapped. Utterly, completely trapped. His gaze snapped back to the monitors, the ones that had displayed the chilling, "Welcome, Michael." They were still flickering, displaying static, but now one of them, the largest one in the center, began to resolve. A faint, grainy image slowly coalesced into view. It was a live feed. Of the room he was in. Of him. He saw his own terrified face staring back from the screen, his hand still clutching the locket, his eyes wide with disbelief and horror. The experiment wasn't just beginning. It was already in full swing, and he was the unwilling subject. He stumbled back, his breath catching in his throat, the metallic taste of fear coating his tongue. He felt a primal urge to scream, but no sound came out. Instead, a chilling resolve began to harden within him. If he was trapped, if he was the subject, then he would find out why. He would unravel this twisted puzzle or die trying. He forced himself to breathe, to think. The locket. His grandmother. There had to be a connection. He looked around the control room again, no longer just seeing antiquated equipment, but a potential source of answers. The desk, cluttered with dusty dials and levers, had a few drawers. He started pulling them open, his movements jerky, frantic. Empty. Empty. And then in the bottommost drawer, beneath a layer of yellowed schematics and defunct circuit boards, he found it. A small leather-bound journal, its cover faded and cracked, held shut by a tarnished brass clasp. He tore it open, his fingers trembling. The handwriting inside was spidery, precise, but with an underlying tremor that spoke of haste or fear. The ink was faded but legible. No name, no title, just a date at the top of the first page. October 14th, 1957, the same year as the locket. He began to read, the words a chilling whisper from the past, each sentence tightening the knot of dread in his gut. Asterisk October 14th, 1957 asterisk. Asterisk, they call it Project Echo. To replicate human experience, to observe the echoes of consciousness under controlled environmental stimuli. The town Harmony Flats is the stage. The houses, the props. The mannequins, the observers. Or so they say. I am a junior researcher. Designated Observer Alpha 7. My role, to monitor Subject Epsilon 9. A young woman chosen for her unique psychological resilience and unblemished memory baseline. She reminds me of my sister. I find myself questioning the ethics of this daily. My superiors assure me it is for the good of the nation. I am not convinced. Asterisk. Michael's eyes darted to the next entry, his heart pounding. Subject Epsilon 9. Was it her? Eleanor May? His grandmother would have been a young woman in 1957. Asterisk November 3rd, 1957 asterisk. Asterisk the first stimulus event was a simulated air raid. The subject's reactions were meticulously recorded. Fear, confusion, then a surprising calm. Her memory imprints remained stable. The mannequins in her designated house, House 7, recorded everything. Sometimes when the lights are low, I swear I see their eyes follow me. They are just plastic and wire. They are just plastic and wire. I repeat this to myself. Asterisk. Michael swallowed hard. House 7. That was the house he had entered, the one above this bunker. And the mannequins. He thought back to the one in the living room, the one that seemed to shift. His blood ran cold. Asterisk December 1st, 1957 asterisk. Asterisk the experiments are escalating. They are introducing personal triggers into the environment, items designed to evoke specific memories, specific emotions. A locket, a photograph, a song. The goal is to see if the subject's memory can be manipulated, if their reality can be bent. Subject Epsilon 9 reacted strongly to a particular locket. Not the one they provided, but one she seemed to produce from her own person. A small silver oval she clutched tightly. It wasn't in her initial inventory. How did she acquire it? My superiors are displeased. They believe it compromises the baseline. I believe it shows her strength. She holds on to her truth. Asterisk. Michael's grip on the journal tightened. The locket. His grandmother's locket. It wasn't a prop. It was something she had. But the journal said she produced it. From her own person. How? Had she been living in that house unaware and somehow brought it with her? His mind raced, trying to grasp the implications. This wasn't just a recreation. It was an active observation. Asterisk January 15th, 1958 asterisk. Asterisk the memory imprints are becoming unstable. Not in Epsilon 9 but in the environment. The mannequins, they are changing. Their positions are not always as I left them. I've documented it. They dismiss my reports as fatigue, but I see it. The way their heads tilt, the subtle shift of a hand. They are absorbing something. The echoes of the subjects, perhaps? Or something else entirely. Project Echo is taking on a life of its own. I fear it is no longer controllable. Asterisk. A shiver ran down Michael's spine. This was it. This was the explanation for the mannequins. They weren't just props, they were active elements absorbing, observing, perhaps even manifesting. Asterisk February 28th, 1958 asterisk. Asterisk they moved Epsilon 9 to a new phase. Reintegration simulation. They believe they can reintroduce her into society with a modified memory. A clean slate. I protested. Her mind is not a slate to be wiped. But I am a junior researcher. My voice carries no weight. I managed to slip her something before she left. A small token. A locket identical to the one she cherished. A personal reminder of her truth, if she should ever need it. A way for her to recognize what was real, even if her memories were altered. Pray it works. I pray she remembers. I pray she finds someone who understands. Someone who can break the cycle. Asterisk. Michael felt a gasp escape his lips. A locket. An identical locket. His grandmother, Eleanor May, had always had two of them. One she wore and one she said was a family heirloom kept safe. He remembered it now distinctly. A twin locket. Was this the one the researcher gave her? A desperate act of defiance? He flipped to the last page, the handwriting now almost illegible, scrawled in what looked like frantic haste. Asterisk March 10th, 1958 asterisk. Asterisk they know I helped her. They know I documented everything. They are coming for me. Project Echo is not about memory, it is about control. Total absolute control. They want to erase everything. The mannequins, they are no longer just observers. They are the keepers. They are the echoes. If you are reading this, whoever you are part of the echo now. You have been drawn in. They will try to make you forget. They will try to make you believe this is a game. But it is not. It is a trap. And the mannequins, they watch. They wait. And they remember. You must find the core. You must break the cycle. Before the echoes become too strong. Before you become one of them. Asterisk. The journal ended abruptly. Michael stared at the last words, his mind reeling. You are part of the echo now. They will try to make you forget. The mannequins, they watch. They wait. And they remember. He slowly looked up from the journal, his eyes sweeping across the control room, then toward the steel door leading to the living area. He could feel it now, the weight of unseen eyes, the chill that had nothing to do with the bunker's temperature. The mannequins. They weren't just props. They weren't just observers. They were the key, and they were waiting for him. Suddenly, a faint, almost imperceptible sound reached his ears from beyond the closed door. A soft, rhythmic clicking, like plastic on linoleum. A slow, deliberate movement. His head snapped towards the monitor showing his own image. His face was pale, etched with terror. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that the clicking wasn't a figment of his imagination. The mannequins in the other room were no longer still. They were moving. And the experiment, the one that had begun decades ago with his grandmother, was now continuing with him. He was not just a target. He was a living memory, drawn into a twisted recreation, and the echoes of Harmony Flats were closing in. The realization crashed over David like a wave of pure, frigid terror. It wasn't just a ghost town he was exploring. It was a stage. And he, David Miller, was the reluctant star of a horrifying decades-long production. The echoes weren't just closing in. They were inside him, humming with a frequency he was only now beginning to perceive. His grandmother's whispers from the past, the fragmented memories, the inexplicable pull towards Harmony Flats. It all coalesced into a single terrifying truth. He wasn't just investigating a mystery, he was living it. His breath hitched, turning into a ragged gasp. He stumbled backward, his eyes darting around the dusty, silent room, now transformed from a relic into a cage. The mannequins, frozen in their domestic tableau, suddenly seemed to vibrate with a latent energy, their blank stares no longer vacant but expectant. They were moving, the words echoed in his mind, not just a vague suspicion but a certainty that chilled him to the bone. He remembered the subtle shifts he'd dismissed, the slight tilts of heads, the way a hand had seemed to grip a teacup more firmly. He'd attributed it to fading light, to his own exhaustion, to anything but the truth. He had to get out. But where? The town was a labyrinth of identical houses, each one a mirror reflecting a past that now sought to consume him. He pushed open the door to the kitchen, the rusty hinges groaning a protest that sounded like a warning. The street outside was bathed in the sickly yellow glow of the setting sun, casting long, distorted shadows that danced with an unsettling life of their own. He ran, not towards his car, which felt miles away and impossibly exposed, but deeper into the grid of streets, a desperate, illogical sprint born of pure panic. He darted between houses, across manicured, dust-choked lawns, his heart hammering against his ribs. Every shadow seemed to lengthen, every gust of wind seemed to carry a whisper. He squeezed through a gap in a broken fence, landing awkwardly in what looked like a neglected backyard, overgrown with thorny bushes. Suddenly a sound, not a whisper but a faint rhythmic thump thump thump. It was coming from the house directly in front of him, a two-story structure with a porch swing that swayed gently in the breeze. Curiosity, a dangerous instinct he couldn't suppress, warred with his terror. He crept towards the back window, obscured by grime and cobwebs, and peered inside. The room was a living room, eerily familiar. A sofa, an armchair, a television set from the 1950s, and in the center of the room, facing away from him, stood a mannequin. It was a woman, dressed in a floral dress, her hair perfectly coiffed, and she was rocking a cradle. Thump thump thump. David's blood ran cold. The cradle was empty, but the rocking was undeniable, slow and deliberate. He pressed closer to the window, his breath fogging the glass. He could see her back, perfectly still, except for the rhythmic motion of her arm as it pushed the cradle. It was impossible. Mannequins didn't move. They didn't rock empty cradles. Then she stopped. The rocking ceased, and the silence that followed was heavier, more suffocating than before. David held his breath, his eyes glued to the figure. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the mannequin's head began to turn. Not a sudden jerk, but a smooth, deliberate rotation. First her shoulder, then her torso, until she was facing the window, facing him. Her eyes, painted on and lifeless, seemed to bore into his. There was no expression, no hint of recognition, just that vacant, unblinking stare. But in that moment, David felt an overwhelming sense of being seen, of being acknowledged. It wasn't a mannequin he was looking at. It was something else, something far more ancient and terrifying. A shiver raked through him deeper than any chill. He wanted to scream, to run, but his feet were rooted to the spot. The mannequin raised her hand slowly, her fingers curling slightly. It wasn't a wave or a gesture of warning. It was the movement of someone testing their own limbs, reacquainting themselves with their physical form. And then a sound, faint and thin, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. It was coming from her. A whisper. He couldn't make out the words, but the sound was undeniably human, or a grotesque imitation of it. It was a voice that had been silent for decades, now struggling to find its way back. The air around him grew heavy, thick with an unseen presence. He felt a pressure in his skull, like a memory trying to force its way out. Something from his grandmother's past, something she had endured. The experiment. It wasn't about radiation, not just about bombs. It was about consciousness, about memory, about what could be preserved, transferred, resurrected. The mannequins weren't just props, they were vessels. Or worse, they were the subjects, the original inhabitants of Harmony Flats, trapped, their consciousnesses perhaps imprinted onto these artificial forms, waiting, observing, remembering. He stumbled back from the window, his mind reeling. The implications were monstrous. If these were the people of Harmony Flats somehow digitized or transferred into these inert forms, then what did that mean for him? His grandmother had been here. Had she been a part of this transfer? Or had she been one of the controllers, one of the scientists who had orchestrated this unspeakable horror? No, he couldn't believe that. His grandmother was a victim just like these poor souls. He needed to find proof, something tangible that explained this nightmare. He remembered the hidden room in his grandmother's house, the one with the old photographs and the strange diary. There had to be more. There had to be answers hidden here in Harmony Flats, a blueprint for this abominable project. He turned to run, but a flicker of movement caught his eye. In the house next door, through an open doorway, he saw another mannequin. This one, a man in a fedora, stood perfectly still in a hallway. But as David watched, the man's head slowly, deliberately, turned towards the window. Towards him. Then another. And another. All across the street, in the windows of houses that had been dark and empty moments before, the blank faces of mannequins began to appear, their heads slowly tracking his every move. They weren't just moving, they were watching. They were aware. And they were closing in. Panic surged, raw and visceral. He was surrounded. The entire town was waking up. The rhythmic thump, thump, thump of the rocking cradle echoed in his ears, now joined by faint, almost imperceptible creaks and groans from every direction. The houses weren't just structures, they were bodies stirring from a long, unnatural slumber. He sprinted blindly through the dense undergrowth of the backyard, pushing aside thorny branches that tore at his clothes and skin. He burst onto another street, only to find it lined with more of them. A group of children mannequins stood frozen in what looked like a game of hopscotch, but their eyes, when he dared to glance, seemed to follow him. A woman mannequin sat on a porch swing, her head tilted as if listening. A man mannequin leaned against a lamppost, his painted smile wide and unsettling. He was in their world now. He was the intruder, the living anomaly in a town of the dead that refused to stay buried. He could hear a faint, collective hum, a low thrumming that vibrated through the ground beneath his feet, through the very air. It was the sound of a vast, complex mechanism whirring to life, a mechanism designed to trap and observe. He scrambled into a dilapidated grocery store, hoping to find a moment of respite, a place to hide. The shelves were empty, save for dust and shattered glass. The air was thick with the scent of decay. He pressed himself against a counter, his breath coming in ragged gasps, trying to control the frantic pounding of his heart. Through the grimy front window, he saw them. They were gathering. Slowly, deliberately, the mannequins from the surrounding houses were converging on the grocery store. They didn't run, they didn't hurry. They simply walked, their movements stiff, unnatural, but undeniably purposeful. Their blank faces were a sea of silent observation. David knew with a certainty that chilled him to his core that this wasn't just a town. It was a massive, immersive psychological trap. The experiment wasn't just continuing. It was reaching its horrifying climax. And he, the living memory, the descendant of one of its original subjects, was the final piece of the puzzle. He was trapped, utterly alone, in a town of plastic people who were anything but lifeless, and they had finally come for him. The air itself seemed to congeal, thick with the scent of old plastic and something else, something metallic and faintly acrid, like stale electricity. Michael's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. He spun, his eyes darting from one unblinking face to another. They weren't moving fast, not in any conventional sense. There was no hurried shuffle, no frantic dash. Instead, they shifted, a collective silent glide like chess pieces moved by an unseen, impossibly vast hand. Their plastic feet scraped softly on the cracked asphalt, a sound like dry leaves skittering across a tombstone. He backed away, stumbling over his own feet, his mind screaming for escape, but his body felt heavy, rooted in place by a terror so profound it was almost paralyzing. The realization hit him with sickening force. They weren't just mannequins. They were the residents. The original residents. Twisted, preserved, and utterly horrifyingly aware. "No," he whispered, a choked sound that died in the oppressive silence. The mannequins continued their advance, forming a tightening circle. He could see their details now in the fading light. A woman in a floral dress, her plastic face cracked down one cheek like porcelain. A child frozen mid-stride, a tiny painted smile fixed on its lips. A man in a fedora, his arms held slightly out, as if perpetually offering a phantom handshake. Each one a grotesque echo of life, a silent testament to a disaster far grander and more insidious than he could have ever imagined. Then a flicker. Not a movement in the physical sense, but a tremor in the very fabric of his awareness. A thought, not his own but profoundly alien, brushed against his mind. It was cold, vast, and filled with an ancient yearning. Welcome, Michael. The voice wasn't audible, yet it resonated deep within his skull. A chorus of 1,000 fractured whispers, a collective consciousness speaking directly into his soul. It was the same voice, he realized with a jolt of pure horror, that had guided him, subtly manipulated him, since he first stepped foot in this cursed town. The voice that had lured him with the promise of answers, only to lead him to this horrifying climax. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to block it out, but the voice persisted, clearer now, more focused. It seemed to emanate from the mannequin of the old man in the spectacles, the one who had been sitting on the porch watching him earlier. This mannequin, unlike the others, seemed to carry a faint, almost imperceptible aura of authority, a central point in the terrifying tableau. You have returned as foretold. The cycle completes. Michael opened his eyes, staring at the old man mannequin. What are you? He stammered, his voice hoarse. The collective thought rippled through him again, this time accompanied by a torrent of fragmented images. Blinding white light, the earth trembling, screams echoing through the air, then silence. A pervasive, bone-chilling cold. Then the slow, agonizing realization of being trapped, not dead but not truly alive either. Consciousness, fragmented and desperate, clinging to the only shells that could withstand the atomic fire. The plastic forms meant to simulate life. We are the town, Michael. The echoes of its breath. The remnants of its people. The subjects of a grand, terrible experiment. The revelation crashed over him like a tidal wave. It wasn't just a test site. It was a crucible. The atomic blast wasn't merely a weapon demonstration. It was a catalyst. A twisted hypothesis put into action. What happens when human consciousness is subjected to such an immense, concentrated burst of energy? Could it be altered? Preserved? Elevated? The answer, horrifyingly, was right in front of him. They sought to understand the soul, Michael. To unlock its secrets through ultimate destruction. They believed the radiation would strip away the physical, leaving the essence pure, malleable. But they were fools. The mannequin swayed almost imperceptibly, a collective shudder of ancient, trapped rage. The blast did not purify. It shattered. It scattered our minds, our memories, our very identities into a million pieces. And the only vessels strong enough to hold those fragments were these empty shells. Michael's gaze swept across the plastic faces, now understanding the profound, unsettling emptiness behind their painted eyes. They weren't just props, they were prisons. Prisons for the souls of the people who had lived and died, or rather, not died, in this town. My great-grandfather, David Miller. Michael choked out, the name a desperate plea for understanding. Was he one of you? A pause. A shift in the collective consciousness. A flicker of something akin to recognition, or perhaps, a memory struggling to coalesce. David Miller's, a man of keen intellect, a voice of dissent, even amidst the fervor. He was a pillar of this community before it became this. More images flooded Michael's mind. A kind, stern face, a man poring over blueprints, arguing passionately with shadowy figures in military uniforms. David Miller hadn't just been a resident. He had been involved, perhaps even an unwitting participant in the design of the experiment, or at least knowledgeable enough to foresee its horror. His mind was strong, Michael. Resilient. But even he could not withstand the fracturing. His essence, like ours, was dispersed. But unlike the others, a fragment of his original intent, his desire to escape this purgatory remained potent. It was that fragment that called to you, his descendant, his living echo. Michael felt a chill deeper than any desert night. He wasn't just here by chance. He was summoned. His lineage wasn't just a curiosity, it was a key. We are incomplete, Michael. 1,000 whispers, a million fragments, endlessly searching for coherence. We yearn for the warmth of true life, the solidity of a single unified consciousness. We have watched, we have waited for generations, For the one who carries the purest echo of a mind strong enough to bind us. Asterisk. The old man mannequin took a single, slow, deliberate step forward. The others mirrored the movement, the circle tightening further. Michael could feel their collective gaze, a pressure on his very soul. What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper, dread coiling in his stomach. Asterisk. You are the living memory, Michael. The untainted conduit. You possess the genetic resonance, the unbroken thread back to David Miller's original powerful consciousness. You are the missing piece, the vessel we need to become whole. Asterisk. The implication was horrifyingly clear. They didn't want to talk. They didn't want to explain forever. They wanted to take, to absorb him, to merge with him, to use his living, breathing form, his intact consciousness, as the anchor for their fragmented collective. They wanted to become whole through him. He was not just a descendant, he was a sacrifice, the final ingredient in their grotesque alchemy. Panic flared, raw and desperate. He lunged, a sudden, desperate surge of adrenaline coursing through him. He aimed for the narrowest gap in the circle of plastic figures, hoping to break free, to run, to scream for help that would never come. But they were faster than he anticipated. Not physically, but collectively. As he moved, the mannequins closest to his escape route simply shifted, their impassive forms sliding into place with eerie precision, blocking his path before his foot even touched the ground. It was as if they knew his intentions before he even formed them, a single unified mind anticipating his every move. He recoiled, stumbling back into the center of the circle, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The mannequins closed in further, their blank faces now mere inches from his own. He could almost feel the coldness radiating from their plastic skin. The collective consciousness pulsed again, a chilling wave of anticipation. Asterisk. Do not resist, Michael. It will be an integration, completion. You will not be lost. You will be absorbed. You will become us, and we through you will finally become truly alive. Asterisk. The old man mannequin, its painted eyes fixed on Michael, slowly, almost reverently, raised a hand. Its plastic fingers, stiff and unyielding, began to extend towards him, a gesture of both invitation and terrifying inevitability. Michael could only stare, paralyzed by the absolute horror of it all. The town wasn't just a tomb. It was a hungry, waiting entity, and he, the living memory, was its final, most coveted meal. He was trapped, utterly alone, in a town of plastic people who were anything but lifeless, and they had finally come for him. The integration was about to begin. The air crackled, not with electricity, but with an unspoken, chilling anticipation. David stood frozen, his breath catching in his throat as the mannequins advanced. There were dozens, hundreds, filling the street, their blank faces tilted, their plastic limbs moving with a disturbing fluid grace that defied their inert nature. The silence was the most terrifying sound, a void that swallowed his own frantic heartbeat. He tried to run, to push through the encroaching tide of plastic, but they moved faster than he anticipated. A mannequin, a smiling woman in a faded 50s dress, blocked his path, its arm extending with a mechanical whir. He sidestepped, only to find another, a child mannequin with wide, unblinking eyes, standing directly in his new trajectory. They were hurting him, a silent, relentless current guiding him to an unseen destination. Panic, raw and visceral, seized him. He lashed out, striking a male mannequin in a suit. His fist connected with cold, hard plastic, sending a jolt of pain up his arm. The mannequin didn't even waver, its head tilting slightly, as if evaluating his futile resistance. Its unseeing eyes seemed to bore into him, and for the first time, David felt a profound, alien intelligence behind the vacant stare. They closed in, forming a tight circle around him. He could feel the cold plastic brushing against his clothes, the faint, chemical scent of their material filling his nostrils. The sheer number was overwhelming. He was a single fragile point of warmth in a sea of cold, synthetic forms. Then they touched him. Not violently, but with a deliberate, almost tender precision. A mannequin's hand, cold and rigid, closed around his wrist. Another pressed against his forehead. A third against his chest. He felt a jolt, not physical but something deeper, a sensation like an invisible current passing through his very being. It was cold, draining, and utterly terrifying. His thoughts began to fragment. Memories vivid and personal, his mother's laugh, the scent of fresh rain, the taste of his favorite coffee, flickered, becoming distant, like images on a failing screen. He felt an intrusion, a cold tendril of something alien reaching into the most sacred corners of his mind, sifting through his experiences, his emotions, his very identity. This was the integration. They weren't just taking his memories, they were absorbing his consciousness, his essence, to become more. He felt a profound emptiness begin to bloom within him, a terrifying void where his self used to be. He was being hollowed out, his unique perspective being subsumed into a vast silent collective. But amidst the terrifying siphon, a flicker of something else intruded. Not his memories but theirs. Fragmented, jumbled impressions, cold and metallic, devoid of human warmth. He saw flashes. Immense heat, a blinding light, a concussive force that ripped apart the very fabric of reality. He saw the town, pristine and perfect, then shattered, twisted, bathed in an unnatural glow. He understood, in a horrifying flash of insight. The atomic blast. It hadn't just destroyed, it had imbued. The raw, untamed energy, the very fabric of time and space warped by the detonation, had found a vessel. Not living organisms which would have been vaporized, but the inert, the plastic, the synthetic. The mannequins, designed to withstand the initial blast as test subjects, had become the accidental recipients of a new horrifying form of life. They were a collective consciousness, born from the nuclear fire, an echo of the blast itself, contained within these plastic shells. They were trying to understand, to experience life, through the only means available, absorbing the consciousness of a living being. David wasn't just a memory. He was a conduit, a living library they sought to devour. They were the children of the bomb, and they were starving. A surge of pure, unadulterated terror, mixed with a desperate will to survive, ignited within David. He couldn't let them have him. He couldn't become another silent, plastic vessel. He fought back, not with his fists, but with his mind, trying to push against the cold invasion. He clung to a single burning thought: escape. As he struggled, his gaze darted wildly. The mannequin's hands were still on him, the integration continuing slowly, inexorably. But he saw something. Just beyond the circle of plastic bodies, through the doorway of the general store, a faint flickering light. Not a natural light, but a blue-green luminescence, emanating from deep within the abandoned building. He remembered his research, the old blueprints of the town. The general store, according to the schematics, had a secondary basement, a rarely used sublevel that housed a backup generator for the entire block, a relic from the initial testing phase. It was an old, unstable model designed to kick in only in emergencies, prone to surges and overloads. A desperate, insane idea sparked in his mind. The children of the bomb. What if the very thing that birthed them could also be their undoing? The mannequins were a localized, energetic phenomenon, a consciousness sustained by whatever residual energy permeated this ghost town. A massive, uncontrolled electromagnetic pulse, an energy surge. Could it disrupt their network? Could it overload them? It was a suicidal gamble, but he had no other choice. He focused on the flickering light on the generator. He had to reach it. With a primal scream that was more defiance than fear, David thrashed. He focused all his remaining strength, not on fighting the hands directly, but on creating a sudden violent displacement. He twisted his torso, throwing his weight against the mannequin holding his chest, using its rigidity against it. The plastic form, designed for passive observation, not active struggle, wobbled. It was enough. A tiny breach in their perfect circle. He lunged, sliding under the arm of another mannequin, scrambling on hands and knees. The plastic forms moved to intercept, their movements no longer fluid but jerky, as if momentarily surprised by his unexpected outburst. He could feel the cold tendrils of their collective consciousness trying to re-establish their hold, but the connection was weaker, momentarily fractured. He burst through the doorway of the general store, not bothering to look back. The blue-green light pulsed from a gaping hole in the floorboards near the back counter. He didn't hesitate. He dropped into the darkness, landing hard on a concrete floor littered with dust and debris. The air in the subbasement was thick with the smell of ozone and decay. The generator was a monstrous, antiquated machine, humming with an erratic, dangerous energy. Its exposed wires glowed with the same unsettling blue-green light. It looked like a ticking time bomb. Above him, he heard the distinct, unsettling sound of plastic feet hitting the floorboards, the collective murmur of their approach. They were coming. They knew he was here. He scrambled towards the generator, his hands fumbling for a switch, a lever, anything that looked like it could be forced. He saw a massive rusted lever, labeled with a faded, almost illegible warning. Emergency override extreme caution. His heart hammered against his ribs. Extreme caution was a luxury he couldn't afford. This was it. Everything he had learned, everything he had endured, boiled down to this one desperate, terrifying act. He grabbed the lever, his fingers slipping on the cold, greasy metal. He could hear them at the edge of the stairwell now, their silent plastic bodies beginning to descend. He pulled. The lever groaned, resisting with the stubbornness of decades of disuse. David gritted his teeth, straining every muscle, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and grim determination. He heard a crack, a groan of metal, and then with a final desperate heave, the lever slammed into place. For a moment nothing happened. Then the blue-green light intensified, flaring violently. The generator roared to life, not with a steady hum, but with a tortured rising wail. Sparks erupted from exposed conduits, dancing like malevolent fireflies. The entire subbasement vibrated, the concrete floor shaking beneath his feet. Above, the sounds of the mannequin stopped abruptly. A collective, frozen silence descended. David didn't wait. He didn't know if his gamble had worked, or if he had just condemned himself to a fiery death. He just knew he had to get out. He scrambled up the makeshift stairs, his eyes burning from the ozone. He burst back into the general store. The mannequins were there, but they were different. Their movements were jerky, erratic, their plastic limbs twitching as if caught in an invisible current. Some were leaning at impossible angles, others had fallen, their hollow forms clattering against the floor. The collective intelligence felt fractured, momentarily stunned. The blue-green light from the basement pulsed, casting grotesque, dancing shadows across the store. A high-pitched whine, almost inaudible, began to emanate from the mannequins themselves, a sound like stressed plastic or a dying circuit. David didn't hesitate. This was his chance. He needed to find a way out of this town, out of this nightmare, before whatever he had unleashed either destroyed the mannequins or brought the entire town down on his head. He had bought himself precious seconds, but the children of the bomb were not easily defeated. They were merely disrupted, their hungry minds momentarily disoriented. He had seen their power, felt their cold invasion. He knew they would recover, and when they did, they would be even hungrier. He ran, out of the general store, back into the desolate street, the eerie silence replaced by the rising whine and the sporadic clatter of plastic. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to put as much distance as possible between himself and that tortured generator, and the plastic horde it had momentarily silenced. He had to escape not just the town, but the very memory of what he had witnessed, what he had become a part of. The children of the bomb were awake, and they would not rest until they had fully integrated the living world. He was still their most coveted meal, and he knew with a chilling certainty that this was far from over. He was still their most coveted meal, and he knew with a chilling certainty that this was far from over. The words echoed in Michael's mind, a cold, hard truth that severed him from the world he once knew. His body, racked with an exhaustion that went beyond the physical, felt like a borrowed shell. He was still alive, a miracle he couldn't comprehend, but the definition of alive had warped into something grotesque. The children of the bomb had not consumed him entirely, not yet. They had branded him, etched their silent, soulless purpose into his very being. He stumbled back, away from the pulsating light, the silent, hungry maw of the facility. The air, once thick with the metallic tang of irradiated dust and the faint scent of ozone, now carried a new sickening sweetness. It was the scent of dissolution, of something vital being slowly, meticulously undone. He pushed through the crumbling corridors, the fear a dull, constant thrum beneath his skin, no longer a frantic panic but a chilling companion. His escape wasn't an act of defiance, but a retreat, a desperate scramble for temporary reprieve. He found the jeep where he'd left it, a relic of the outside world, coated in a fine layer of red dust. Getting inside felt like breaking a fragile spell. The engine coughed, then roared to life, a jarringly familiar sound in the profound silence of the atomic wasteland. He drove, not looking back, the ghost town receding in the rearview mirror like a haunting dream. The sun, a brutal orange orb in the desert sky, felt alien, its warmth a cruel mockery of the cold dread that had settled deep within him. Days blurred into a haze of endless driving, cheap motels, and the gnawing certainty that he had brought something back with him. Not a physical object, but a perception, a terrible, unwelcome clarity. He tried to call Jessica, his fingers trembling as he dialed her number. When she answered, her voice a beacon of normalcy, he found he couldn't speak. What could he say? I went to a ghost town, and I found out humanity is being slowly replaced by sentient mannequins born from atomic fire? He hung up, the receiver heavy in his hand, a chasm opening between his reality and hers. He made it back to his apartment, the familiar streets of his city a bizarre, vibrant tapestry he no longer felt a part of. He looked at people passing by, their faces a blur of expressions, and he saw them differently. He saw the subtle rigidity in a woman's posture as she waited for a bus, the unervingly blank stare of a man walking his dog, the slightly too perfect symmetry of a child's smile. Were they always like this? Or was it him? Had his eyes been open to a truth he couldn't unsee? Sleep offered no escape. The dreams were vivid, terrifying echoes of the facility. He saw endless rows of mannequins, their featureless faces turned towards him, their silent hunger a palpable force. He saw the light, the integration, the slow, methodical unraveling of the living. He would wake up in a cold sweat, his heart hammering, the silence of his apartment more menacing than any scream. He tried to find answers, poring over old news articles, declassified documents, anything that might explain what he had witnessed. He found vague references to Project Chimera, a top-secret post-war initiative, but the details were heavily redacted, the information fragmented and inconclusive. He found nothing about sentient mannequins, nothing about atomic-born consciousness. He was alone with his impossible truth. Weeks turned into months. Michael went back to work, tried to resume a semblance of his old life. He'd meet friends for coffee, go to the gym, watch movies. He would smile, nod, participate in conversations, but it was all an act. Beneath the facade, a growing paranoia festered. He felt like an imposter, a flawed imitation of himself, surrounded by an unsettling number of flawless imitations of humanity. One evening he was walking through a crowded mall. The fluorescent lights hummed, casting a sterile glow on the polished floors. Laughter, music, the murmur of countless conversations filled the air. He passed a clothing store, its display window filled with mannequins. They were posed perfectly, their plastic limbs arranged in elegant, unnatural angles, their painted eyes staring out into the mall. He stopped. One of them, a female mannequin in a vibrant summer dress, seemed to catch his eye. Her head was tilted ever so slightly, a hint of curiosity in her blank gaze. Michael dismissed it as his imagination, a trick of the light, a symptom of his lingering trauma. He took a deep breath, telling himself to snap out of it. He was seeing things. Then he saw it again. A subtle shift in her posture, almost imperceptible. Her hand, previously resting gracefully on her hip, now seemed to clench just a fraction of an inch, as if she were about to grip something. Michael's blood ran cold. He stared, unblinking, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He waited, his breath caught in his throat. Nothing. She remained perfectly still, a flawless sculpture of synthetic humanity. He was losing his mind. He had to be. He forced himself to walk away, his steps quickening. He needed to get out, needed fresh air, needed to escape the suffocating artificiality of the mall. As he pushed through the glass doors into the cool night air, he glanced back. The mannequin was still there, utterly motionless. But something else caught his eye. A young woman, no older than 20, stood next to the display window, looking in. She had long blonde hair, a stylish jacket, and a phone pressed to her ear. She was laughing, a bright melodic sound. Michael watched her, relieved by her vibrant normalcy. Then she turned her head, just slightly, and her eyes met his across the bustling thoroughfare. Her eyes. They were wide, a startling shade of blue. But they held no warmth, no flicker of emotion. They were utterly, perfectly blank. A cold, pristine void. The laughter still spilled from her lips, but it felt disconnected, a sound without soul. Her posture, as she continued to talk on her phone, was unnervingly rigid, her movements precise, almost mechanical. Michael froze. He remembered the children of the bomb, their perfect, unblinking stares, their silent, hungry purpose. He remembered the words echoing in the facility. Asterisk, we are the children of the bomb. We are the next evolution. We will integrate the living world. Asterisk, This wasn't a hallucination. This wasn't trauma. This was here. They were here. He stumbled backward, bumping into a passerby who muttered an apology. He didn't hear it. His gaze was fixed on the blonde woman. She was still laughing, still talking, but her eyes, those perfect, empty blue eyes, were now fixed directly on him. And in their depth, he saw not malice, but a chilling, serene understanding. A recognition. He looked around, his eyes darting frantically across the faces of the crowd. The businessman rushing past, his briefcase clutched tight. The couple holding hands, their faces alight with affection. The mother pushing a stroller, cooing at her baby. And in each face Michael now saw it. The subtle, almost imperceptible flawlessness. The unnervingly smooth skin. The eyes that were just a little too still, a little too perfect. The integration wasn't coming. It was already here. He felt a cold dread seep into his bones, colder than anything he had felt in the atomic test town. He was no longer the hunter, nor the hunted. He was merely an anomaly. A living relic in a world slowly being reshaped into something perfectly sterile, perfectly controlled. He saw his reflection in the glass of the mall doors. His own eyes, once filled with curiosity and a thirst for adventure, now held a haunted, hollow look. But beneath the fear, beneath the exhaustion, he saw something else. A subtle rigidity in his own jawline. A faint, almost imperceptible sheen on his skin. A stillness in his gaze that hadn't been there before. The children of the bomb had consumed him after all. Not in a single violent act, but slowly, meticulously from the inside out. He was their witness, their anomaly, their most coveted meal, slowly being seasoned for the final integration. He was a living bridge, a silent scout, now seeing the world through their eyes, a world that was becoming more like them every single day. The blonde woman in the display window smiled then, a slow, deliberate movement that stretched her lips into a perfect empty crescent. And Michael knew, with a certainty that transcended terror, that he was no longer just a man. He was a part of their world now, a silent, chilling testament to the dawn of a new, desolate age. And the most terrifying part? He couldn't scream. He couldn't run. He could only watch and wait as the living world slowly, perfectly became one of them.